All right, we are back here on the podcast talking some international soccer here, a rarity on the podcast. But when the U.S. goes down in flames, kind of got to check in here with our soccer guy on the podcast, Martino Puccio is here. Martino, how are you?
Been better during the summer, Mike. Funnily enough, the Mets are the only thing keeping things interesting this time of year, but hope you're well also.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I was a bit annoyed watching the game last night, but we'll get to that in a second here
Uh,
because, well, not the soccer game, not the Met game. The Met game was actually enjoyable for the most part.
well, yeah. Bottom of the 10th got a little rocky, but yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, so you got to talk about. I'd seen last week on the pod, we're going to do an update on Copa America on the pod. You agreed to come on. I figured, oh, okay, we'll probably look at the bracket, seeing who the U.S. is going to play in this round. And surprise, surprise, they're not even in this round. They get knocked out in the last year of the group stage last night by Uruguay. Panama beats Bolivia to go through here. So I'll go with the $1 million question here. What went wrong for the U.S. in this tournament, which they hosted, became the first ever host of Copa America to knock it out of the group stage?
Yeah, I mean, what went wrong? I mean, there's plenty of things, and it just didn't even really date back to the first match of the tournament. I think it really goes back to last summer, winning a tournament without Gregg Berhalter, after the entire situation with him and the Federation investigating that issue from years ago between him and his now wife. Um, they end up going in circles, not really going with anything. I thought the US played far better as a team last year than they have under any point in the Berhalter era. And the reason why they won anything in the Berhalter era is simply because of talent on paper and nothing else. The style has always been lethargic, the mentality has always been weak, and it's always been reflective. And you wondered when it was going to catch up to them, right? Because in the 2022 World Cup, you always had that cop out of they made it out of the group. The Netherlands are just better. And I think everybody knows that. But there were so many underlying issues at that time that everyone pretty much knew were going to boil over. And lo and behold, it happens in the one tournament and probably the last time that they're playing. Well, it's not probably, it is the last time they're going to play a competitive game prior to the 2026 World Cup because they're already qualified for it because they host that one as well. So the fact that there was three matches to really show what the team was made of and what they were going to be capable of doing, they came out flat in every single performance. That includes the 2-0 Bolivia win. So just for reference to start back from it on what went wrong, a 2-0 victory over Bolivia is not good enough. Panama winning 3-1 is a great result for them. Bolivia had everything to play for at that point, including pride. Panama had some pressure on them because basically, if they won and the odds of the U.S. beating Uruguay were low, that they were going to go through. And Panama played well enough in that one. They played obviously well enough in the match against the U.S., but 2-0 against them where you didn't create that many awesome chances. The finishing from the goals were largely due to the goalkeeper situation being horrific for Bolivia. Like the fact that Bolivia actually conceded those two goals was laughable. The entire performance really from the national team wasn't great, but at least you could hold on to the result itself with the 3 points. Then you go to the Panama match. Your favorites for that. You get a red card from Tim Weah, who sometimes in this sport, there are red cards that you could find acceptable. Never, ever, ever, ever do you find a red card acceptable in the first half, let alone when your player hits somebody in the back of the head with a closed fist. Tim Weah had one of the most shocking and awful moments you'll see from a national team member or any player in a sport, where you literally just put your team in the worst possible position. Granted, the national team were up 1-0, and people are always running to the window and trying to say, oh, yeah, but it's harder when you're down a man. If you watch this sport and you've been up 1-0, and I've even seen teams that I root for that have been up a man lose because they don't have the right mentality. And that's reflected in the manager. That's Berhalter's fault. There's so many different problems that you could point to, but I think that match in particular is the number one thing that you could point at and look at with all the lists of issues, right? From mentality to quality to just basically not having the manager to have them right the ship. I mean, listen, You could have just come out and been super defensive in terms of style when you go up 1-0. You know you should just be hitting on counterattacks and letting Panama come at you and try and score. That was the better option there. The US played lethargic. They didn't really have much continuity. The substitutions made little to no sense. And to be quite honest with you, they look like a deer in the headlights after Weah got the red card because they look like a team that didn't know that they were capable of facing some adversity, which is a massive issue because if things aren't going well for the US, it blows up in their face like that match. And then again, when you're facing Uruguay on the final match day to wrap up, what went wrong ultimately was that Uruguay was through to the next round. They were winning the group. It didn't really matter at this point. And the fact that Uruguay still played their best players, Bielsa, their manager, was suspended for this one. So he's not even on the touchline. They don't even have the best manager in the group doing anything. And this was also a manager that the U.S. elected not to hire because of a litany of reasons, and probably the number one being nepotism. And shocker, that's the biggest buzzword going around in the U.S. sports right now. And this was just a lifeless sort of performance where you're hoping that Bolivia does something and the U.S. don't try and take anything into their own hands. Where Gregg Berhalter is signaling, it's 1-1, it's 1-1. Does it really matter what's going on? Yes, you still have to win. Bolivia are still terrible. The score 1-1 in that game does not matter. And that was at least a half an hour left to play. So there was plenty of time for Bolivia to concede. They conceded 2 more times. So it obviously proved it didn't matter. And not only was Berhalter kind of accepting this mediocrity of, oh, it's 1-1, it's 1-1. The play on the field in front of him was so bad that result happening in the other game shouldn't have mattered. And that's the problem, because accepting mediocrity, the mentality, everything going into it was just, okay, well, if we can get this one thing our way and we get out of the group and we're likely to either play Brazil or Colombia in the next round and we lose that one, we just lost to a better country, much like the World Cup in 2022. But instead, it caught up to them this time, and they got eliminated in the most embarrassing fashion in one of the weaker groups, by the way. They didn't have one of the tougher groups in the tournament. So the fact that all of that culminated over the course of those 3 matches is basically the main issue for the past God knows how many years. And you would like to say that this would help in the long run, but the manager is still here as of today, the next day. So, and even then, even if he were to resign or get sacked, who are they going to hire? Does anyone trust them to hire the right guy? Because the right guy, also one of the other right guys, is now with Canada, and Jesse Marsh, who was turned down for this job and opportunity, and he's gotten them into the next stage, despite the fact that they probably don't have as much talent on paper, and they've had issues in recent, months or so. That's the problem. They have no idea who knows how to run things, and they don't have quality people to run them, and they just hire their friends and family.
Yeah, certainly a lot to get into there. I want to start with the Panama game, obviously, which obviously you brought the great point. The red card's obviously a big deal in this tournament. Really was sort of the turning point for the U.S. in the whole tournament here. But
Yes.
people, I would say, oh, like we're down a man. It's hard to win that way. But you know what? They're up 1-0. They conceded a goal right away. Like if they get out of that match with a draw, they're still advancing in this tournament, in all likelihood. So it's just a matter of the fact that they did a terrible job.
Just get a result, right? Like if you don't want to point blame to the 10 other players that were on the field at that point because Tim Weah put them in that position, you could say okay, but it was the way that they approached it was horrible. And that's on the manager. That's a reflection on the manager. Sure, to an extent, it's a reflection on the player because half of them are not even that good to begin with. My goodness, everybody thinks some of these guys are like the top end talent in this team. Let me make this very clear. The top end talent on this team is better than the majority of the generations that have come through the U.S. Christian Pulisic is still technical ability, right, skill, performance in Europe, the best UN's men's national team player of all time. Like he is the best player we've ever produced. Gio Reyna is up there with one of the more talented players we have ever produced. Weston McKennie, I mean, I don't even want to get into him and his weight issues coming in overweight somehow to a tournament like this is just another disgraceful thing. But goalkeepers like Matt Turner, just not good enough. Zach Steffen nowhere to be found. You don't have defenders that are that good. Tim Ream is the example. The guy is in his mid to late 30s now. The fact that he's still your backbone and there hasn't been anyone that's even remotely talented enough to guide this team for the next 10 years is embarrassing. And again, a reflection of player development in the US. It's a player development from the manager of the US men's national team and just overall quality of the players. So it's a mixture of overrating some of these guys and also just having the worst possible guys to guide them. So it's very much so like Sam Darnold and the Jets with Adam Gase. Was Sam Darnold the greatest of talents? No, probably not, but there was some talent there. Did the organization at hand that has this player do anything to put him in the best position to succeed? The answer was also no, because they gave him Adam Gase. These players got Gregg Berhalter. What else is there to say?
Yeah, not a ton more to say. And get into last night's game too. Obviously one of the big complaints online has obviously been the referee, who was horrendous in this game. You could argue the VAR call, but bottom line is this: in a game where they knew they had to win going in here, they knew they had to win this game. They got 4 shots off in 96 minutes.
They weren't even good. They weren't even good shots.
They were
They
not.
really weren't. Like they weren't like, you know, like they were like I tweeted it. There were some instances where you're like, okay, wow, that's like pretty solid play in the first half. Nothing ended up leading to great chances or opportunities on goal. Like Tyler Adams had one advantage where if he would have just taken a normal touch like a professional player expected at his level in the Premier League, then he probably would have been in behind goal. Fullerin Balogun as well had a pretty poor touch in his attempt where he collided with the goalkeeper. He was also offside on that one. So it kind of didn't matter, but those were the fine margins. You knew the margins were small. You had to take advantage of them. They didn't even come close to it. And that's the funny thing, because you see Canada arguably with less talent, right? Even though their high-end talent's incredible, they still found a way to stay competitive against Argentina. They left that match against Argentina despite a loss feeling really good about themselves. Under no circumstance this entire tournament, and especially last night, did you feel good about themselves? Did the US feel good about themselves leaving a match? And because of the way Berhalter plays, because of the approach, because of how these players were, I mean, there were so many. I don't think a single defender last night put in a good shift. I don't think a singular fullback put in a good shift. In fact, I don't even think a single player outside of like maybe Pulisic for 5 to 10 minutes or Gio for 5 to 10 minutes played well. They were all poor. They were all terrible. They were out of position. They didn't do anything that was required of them off the ball or on the ball. It sucked. They were terrible. And I'm running out of breath right now.
Yeah, and another thing I'll note too, when you talk about the chances they had here, the one that sticks out to me is they were down 1-0 about the 80th minute. The keeper comes out for Uruguay, is a wide open net. The ball gets back to a U.S. player, and like he hesitates instead of putting it right on net. Whereas like maybe you get the rebound, something happens here, he hesitates, lets defenders swarm, and they don't get a good look there.
That's a skill issue. Simple. It's a skill issue. They're not good enough. These aren't good enough players. And that's some of them are not good enough. I know people love to like boast about the golden generation and how much better these players are because they play in Europe, and on a surface level it's true, but this isn't a team. Like there's people who could watch that are casuals that don't tune in besides international tournaments that'll sit there and tell you they don't look that good, because it doesn't take the most genius of people to see that. And the fact that everybody knows it, including your mother down the block or whatever, but the Federation can't, is why there's so many issues to this day.
Yeah, I think also part of the Federation's mental block here is that they sit so high in the FIFA rankings. Like going into the match, people not realize that the US is 11th and Uruguay is 14. You watch these two teams play, you're like, Uruguay is much better than USA.
Yeah, you're right, but they're always shit rankings. None of them have ever mattered. No one ever takes them seriously, I guess, except for the federations. I mean, listen, Italy won the World Cup in 2006. They were ranked 10th. On paper, they have far better talent than most teams. They're ranked 10th for God knows what. They didn't allow an open play goal in the tournament. They conceded a penalty and there was an own goal scored on. That was it. Number 10. Belgium's been top 3 for 20 years at this point. Their golden generation haven't won shit. The U.S. going up in these rankings is because of Gold Cup performances in one of the worst in one of the worst conferences in the world, and on top of it, they're winning Nations Leagues, a part of a tournament or part of a conference yet again as one of the worst in the world. That absolutely boosts their FIFA ranking. Everybody knows it. But like, there's people talking about like, oh, Uruguay like aren't that much better than the U.S. Fede Valverde, who is a midfielder for Uruguay, right? For those of you who don't know him, plays for Real Madrid. He would head and shoulders, God Almighty, be the best U.S. men's national team player of all time by a fucking mile, by a mile, and it wouldn't even be close. Darwin Nunez, probably the best U.S. men's national team player ever, and that guy's a loser half the time. There are levels to this shit, and people still don't get it. They think because players are so much better than they were 15 years ago in the US, that means they're good on a global scale. No, no, it doesn't. It means you've only closed the gap from, I don't know, 100% to 97.5%. Like there's so much further to go because even then, the players who are talented currently are a couple of years away from their 30s now. And on top of it, there aren't that many great youngsters as of right now that we know of and are developing to reach those heights as well or go beyond to what Pulisic is. That's a massive issue because Pulisic was coming up when he was 17, 16, playing in the Champions League. That's a big difference. These guys aren't even close to that level right now. That's an issue. So you're basically saying, we kind of got lucky in the lottery. It's actually not that we're getting that much better. That's another issue too. A lot of people just don't want to accept that these players may not be as good as they want them to be.
Yeah. I go back to your 2006 point at the World Cup with the Italy rankings. And then remember, US is in that group here. Why the rankings don't matter. Italy was 13 entering the World Cup. US was 5. And we know how bad they were in that tournament.
They were awful. They only scored against Italy, like I said, because it was an own goal
Yeah.
from Christian Sicardo, who it was a terrible player. So he was only up there because of the manager's choice, not because he was good. So yeah, I mean they're just garbage. It's just not a good team, and people just want to pretend otherwise.
Yeah. And the group they got in this tournament was like a gift compared to what they could have had. I mean, you have
Yes,
Bolivia, who
yes,
stinks, Panama, who they own forever, and Uruguay, who is, yes, better than them in terms of a technical ability. But like,
yeah.
that's the third game in the fixture. Like, if they won the first two
It's
or even got points, they would have been through.
correct, and not only that, it's not even a respectable performance. The 1-0 scoreline is not even reflective of what we saw for 90 minutes, which is always funny when it comes to scores in this game because 1-0 it felt like 5-0. It
Yes.
felt insurmountable. A one goal lead being insurmountable is more evidence that you're not good enough or anywhere near close to it.
Yeah. Let's get to Berhalter out, which is the
Mhm.
topic of the day right now. There was a statement put out by the Federation last night after the game, said, our return performance fell short of our expectations. We must do better. We conducted a comprehensive review of our performance in Copa America, how to best improve the team and results towards the 2026 World Cup, which is a bunch of word salad saying nothing, whereas they're going to take their sweet time like deciding what to do with this one. No immediate action of the Federation, not surprised there whatsoever.
They're not going to do an immediate decision. I'm sure most of them have their minds made up. Because you have to think about all scenarios, or at least a competent federation would. So maybe I'm putting too much stock into them being competent. Their statements kind of mean nothing, but they're also not as good for Berhalter. We know Berhalter's not going to resign. Of course, the guy's not going to resign. Why would he? Why he wouldn't have any humility, any dignity to look at himself in the mirror and say, "Hey, maybe I'm not the guy for this job," despite the fact that everything is pointing towards that. But that's besides the point, right? Ultimately, he needs to go. They need to sack him. And if they don't sack him, it's going to get even worse. If you thought this was ugly, wait for 2026.
Yeah, a couple of things I point out. Did you watch any of the post-match coverage on Fox FS1 last night?
Yeah, of course, I watched it. I'm somewhat curious on it, but like kind of being in like that circle of U.S. men's national team talk, you knew what was going to be coming. And it's just almost the same thing every time that they fail. Is I'm just disappointed, and like I thought Alexi Lawless for once, actually had some decent words to say. I agree with what he was saying on a larger scale. Clint Dempsey, you could obviously see how upset he was. Carly Lloyd's points about, even when we were winning titles with the women's team, we hated and despised our coaches. The U.S. men's national team and these players love Gregg Berhalter way too much.
Yeah, speaking of the
Okay,
Carly Lloyd comments, I do have them here. I'm gonna try and play it for the
go for it.
audience here. So let's play that audio here, see if we get this coming through. So this is from last night from the post game on FS1. It's from Twitter, their Fox Soccer Twitter.
My concern is just how comfortable these players are with Berhalter. I mean, we won championships and we hated our coaches, and I'm not saying you have to hate your coach, but I question how comfortable it is inside that locker room. Are they being pushed? Are they being held accountable? And it doesn't look like that from the outside looking in. Again,
Yeah, I think that's
concern is
certainly a point that you just made here is that like what's your point is like obviously like the women's teams had much more success internationally than the men's team. And they made a great Carly made a great point, somebody who's won World Cups before and said, like maybe we're too buddy with our coach here. And we heard several players like, oh, it's not Gregg's fault. We love Gregg. Like, maybe you need that guy who's the asshole in the room, kind of get the best out of you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and Carly, in comparison to the women's team are still on paper like the most talented, or like one of the 5 most talented countries in the world, like undisputed. No one's going to argue it. The men's team is not that. But her point on a larger scale is there's not a guy, and again, I should make it a point that these players wanted Gregg to stay after everything that had happened to begin with. One, players don't always know what's best for them, right? Just like when you're a kid, you're 10 years old, you love somebody or something. Maybe it's not great for you. That's why your parents make the decision. And the parents in this case would be the federation. The federation didn't know well enough. They didn't realize that their players and what they think don't matter. It's about results, it's about play, it's about progression, right? Because if you want to talk about how 2026 is the most important year in this men's program's federation and how much you've grown from 1994, is there as much growth from 1994 into 2024 as people would like to say? And the answer is fuck no, because it's been 30 years and it's largely the same stuff. And the fact that people just want to sit there and act like this is some sort of drastic improvement, no, it's not even close to it. And the fact that this morning as well, people are just like, yeah, throw 100 million at Jurgen Klopp, and you get all these casuals like, give him like a Sean Payton type deal, let him run you don't know shit about shit, okay? First of all, the guy just left one of the biggest and best jobs in the world at Liverpool because he wants to take a break. You think he wants to come to the US? You think he wants to run this federation? First of all, he wouldn't agree with 95% of the stuff that's been going on. He wouldn't agree with how the federation is set up. He wouldn't agree with pay to play. Everything starts with the youth. He would hate everything about the youth and what they do over here. Okay. So him coming in to try and change all of that, you're asking to change everything. You're not just talking about the national team. The national team is different. You're talking about the system here. And when you get someone like that, you want everything fixed. And he's not going to accept it for so many reasons. So that point alone is delusional. So again, this just comes down to what you hear on Twitter or social media and a lot of other places are coming from people who are casuals. Okay. So when their opinion is very loud and they're getting likes from all these people and they're their top media members like the Colin Coward or all these other people are speaking out, well, like, I don't know if this is, do we like this? When they were blaming Jurgen Klinsmann all those years ago because he dropped Landon Donovan, you guys still don't get what the issue is. You think it's just the manager with this. And the manager is awful. He needs to go. Don't get me wrong. But there are so many issues because everybody knows even if you get a new manager in here, you'll improve your play, but the issues at hand are still going to be looming in the background. And that's the problem because ultimately this federation and the people in charge of it are still in charge. And until that changes and until the whole system changes, you're going to see more of the same, despite the talent.
Yeah. I mean, there are talent. He's obviously heard Clint Dempsey last on the post game say the U.S. hasn't had number 9 in forever, which that's
because Clint's great. Clint's the best.
You're not going to get that fixed by 2026. Not going to magically find number 9 in 2 years who's going to play here. But like The
It's under
manager,
2 years.
yeah, the manager is something that definitely has to be discussed here because I think the Berhalter thing, we've seen the results of this federation have not been great. And like also, I mean, like you point out last night, the epitome of the going 1-1, that it's embarrassing to the federation that like Berhalter basically our best shots is that we're rooting for Bolivia to tie Panama to get through instead of taking care of our own business. That's a loser mentality.
It's the same thing with like the Trinidad and Tobago match that had them miss the 2018 World Cup, where you're just like they're looking past everything. And anytime I see some awful mentality or not taking advantage of the path in front of you, I can only and always think of the 2007 Mets every single time, because it doesn't matter if the Phillies are winning games. If you win your games, none of that shit matters. Take care of what's in front of you. Just hoping and trying to put pieces together of this puzzle are stupid. It's a loser, man. Like, bro, no one cares what Panama and Bolivia are doing. Because you didn't beat Panama, you have to beat Uruguay. Why are you possibly ever relying on someone else to help yourself? That's the most mind-boggling thing. It's an issue in America anyways, because everyone expects someone else to pick up the slack for them instead of doing it themselves. And this is what you get. Another failed tournament. And I am so relieved in a way that this happened, because now we're starting to have bigger conversations, despite the fact we have had these conversations before. But when's it going to change? Is this the time it's going to change for real? Because I'm inclined to think no, but God, I think you can spark the debates for it, or the conversations for it, because this is a disgrace again.
Yeah, absolutely is here. And another thing you mentioned here in terms of like the change here on the bigger level, like we know like the bigger level stuff's not going to feel like it feels like to me they're going to wait a little bit and throw Berhalter to the wolves to appease like the American Outlaws and all the crazies are going, oh, Berhalter's the problem. We got to get rid of him. Assuming they do dump him. And the 1-1 coming right before Uruguay scored the goal was also quite ironic. That happened literally in one of the critical seconds of the game. He's more worried about what's going on in the other game. But if they do move on from Berhalter, like, who are they going to go try and get? Like, who's out there that they could actually try and pull to try and make something out of this cycle? That's like 2 years left. They have no real like tests left internationally. They're all going to play basically teams.
So like even if I were to even suggest the name, it wouldn't probably even be on the radar of these federations. There's not many great international managers out there, right? Like if you look at the larger landscape of things, there's a lot of still really poor managers, or guys who are good at the club level that stink when they go into the international level. We've seen at Italy, Roberto Martinez still getting jobs. With Portugal after his failure at Belgium, you kind of see with Fernando Santos, who was the manager of Portugal. He was also another disaster. Gareth Southgate's another guy. Like there's so many names here, and so like the all-time greats and a Carlo Ancelotti, a Jose Mourinho, they're still taking club jobs. They don't want to take these managerial jobs. And the one guy that I thought, well, there was two guys that I thought that could have done a great job, Bielsa being one of them, but Uruguay goes and hires him because guess what? They have a higher standard. They were playing poorly and they sacked their manager and they got someone in that could change the total outlook of the team. And then again, you have someone in Jesse Marsh, who almost every single person, listen, Jesse was doing pretty poorly at Leeds. He didn't do that great of a job at club level, right? Like he had some rocky moments, but overall, he was still a capable enough manager and someone that the U.S. probably should have looked at. And Canada makes the move. They have one of their biggest moments ever in their federation because they knew their standard job. Canada made the World Cup for the first time in God knows how long, or it could have been their first time. And the fact that they made it, they topped the qualifying group for CONCACAF was great. And they fell short of their goals in that World Cup. Then they started to stumble after that. They made the decision that was difficult. They knew that things were not looking great. They made a tough decision. They brought in Jesse Marsh. The U.S. still kept with the same people. That's the problem. And the name is escaping me on the manager who was taking over last year after Gregg was away from the team and no longer the manager. My guess is that they go back to that. They just revert back and make that sort of decision. anyone hoping that there's some big massive name out there that they could go and grab, you're sadly mistaken. You're going to get somebody more than likely, if it's not internally with the US, someone that is just I don't even know. I don't even know a name to throw out here because there's so much more nuance to the conversations of guys and why they would be hired for this national team. It's not about money, guys. It's about fit culturally. And it's very hard to assimilate yourself with a culture and an environment that is the US Soccer Federation because it's a disgraceful one. It is one that is embedded in nepotism. It's embedded in mediocrity, a lack of accountability, and just so many other superlatives that you want to label them as. They're bad. The people in charge are bad. The odds of them leaving are low. And the fact that we're hoping for someone to come in and take the job, it's poor because you're really just like, it's like asking Woody Johnson to turn around and out of nowhere and not be the owner that he is. Asking these people in charge of the federation to change how they are is a big ask, and it's highly unlikely that it changes.
Yeah. I was looking up trying to see who was the manager of like
Yeah,
Lisa
it's
Callahan was the interim manager when they won the Nations League.
yeah, there you go. It's Callahan. Sorry. So I like you can go with him. I thought they played well. It's probably one of the more realistic options to get everybody on board relative to fans, to the executives within the federation, and then the players themselves. So I could easily see it being Callahan. And apologies for missing the name.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure here. And that's certainly a conversation to have for the future because this feel like that with this situation, basically like really have put themselves behind the eight ball for having a good showing in 2026.
I hope. I just it's because it's weird too because just like to give a heads up for like the 2026 World Cup for many people, it's going to be expanded. Three teams from well, sorry, not it's going to be expanded so like teams are going to be able to have a chance to go further into the knockout stages like it's going to be a little bit easier all around. They don't have to qualify for this one. We know they're in the World Cup. It's just really about gearing up and having everyone prepared for that. And who is the best person for that job? God knows. But it's not Gregg Berhalter.
Yeah, and look at the 2026 World Cup here. I mean, it's a 32 team knockout round. So like the odds are like aren't something cash out, they should get to that knockout round. But like if you're hoping this is gonna be like 2002 where you're making runs to the quarterfinals and you're playing like elite teams, I would not expect that.
2002 was like one of the luckier things to ever happen. And on top of it, it was an actual fixed tournament.
Yeah.
It was fixed.
Yeah.
So like it like I don't even give a shit about that. And I know you're just using it as an example, but just like I don't like I like don't care. I like don't care. Like these performances are just not even good enough. Nobody wants to ask and look at themselves more harshly with this national team because they've made strides and I understand looking at positives, but there are many positives to take away if you want to reach a higher standard.
Yeah. Absolutely. Here, let's talk a little bit about these tournaments that are still going on here internationally. We got Copa America. We are wrapping up the group stage today. We have basically know Brazil and Colombia are going to be in. It just matter what order they're in for their matchups here. Like, who do you think is the favorite to win this thing right now?
I still think Argentina on a level are the best team. I think that their ability to having won the World Cup and Copa America have been massive. Messi still on his day, even in his worst games, is making an impact. None of these teams within this competition are super powers. I think Argentina are clearly the class of the competition. I think Brazil on paper are phenomenal, but they put in these odd performances. Vinicius Jr. not as great for Brazil as he should be, being, a leading contender for the Ballon d'Or award this coming year. There's a lot of question marks with that, but it's largely the big. It's Uruguay, it's Argentina, it's Colombia, and it's Brazil. And one of those four teams will certainly win this tournament. I think anything else is a massive shock and one of the bigger tournament upsets in history, I believe. So ultimately, it depends who we mix and match here, and the path. So ultimately, I do see it being Argentina or Uruguay. I think Brazil would probably be third for me. Brazil is just a little bit harder to trust, but on their day, they have the individual quality to win a game. But as far as teams go, I think it would just be Argentina. I think they're class from every single position, and they don't have players who sort of underperform for the national team. And if there was a player, it would have been Lautaro Martinez, but he's heating up and he's a very streaky striker. And when Lautaro Martinez is on, he's a top 5 striker in the world. So and he's playing like that right now. So I would look out for Argentina to repeat Copa America.
You think Canada has a shot to get past Venezuela and get to the semis?
Yes, absolutely. I think they definitely have a shot at that. So we'll see. It's Jason Bay versus Johan Santana in that regard. So we'll see what happens. I think Canada can pull it off. There's certain things that make me question Canada in terms of their finishing ability. They were up a man for like the majority of the group stage because there was a couple of red cards, but that's out of their control. They can only do with what's in front of them. I think Canada and Jesse Marsh have done a good job. And in the knockout stages, as we've seen over the years, anything can happen. I do think Canada for sure can make the semifinal.
Let's go to the Euros. Obviously, the other big tournament going on
Mm.
right now here, and like the quality soccer in this tournament is a lot of fun to watch here. You got some heavy hitting quarterfinals already set up here, and obviously we're recording on the last day of the round of 16, so we're not going to know much about Netherlands, Romania, and Austria, Turkey yet. But you got Spain, Germany, Portugal, France, England, Switzerland. Those are three like heavy hitting matchups.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's kind of like top heavy on one side of the bracket as opposed to the other when you look at some of the big names. But at this point, you basically have to look at it like, do better in the group stage, buddy, because France was really lacking. They're still yet to score an open play goal. I think that they ruled that an own goal yesterday. I'm not 100%, or the other day, I'm not 100% sure, but it's just sort of stuff like that. I think England versus Swiss is going to be a lot of fun. I think the Swiss could easily advance and move on in that one. England really lethargic. It took a miracle goal from Jude Bellingham to score there. Their defense is very weak. They have a lot of issues, struggling against sides that are compact and well drilled, which Switzerland are. But they have the individual quality to carry them through games, and that's essentially what happened and how they beat Slovakia despite a really lackluster performance. And the same could apply to Portugal as well. Portugal on paper have one of the best teams in this tournament. They're really super talented. They can, again, they could win this tournament. It's not completely off the table, but just with the way they play, and now they go up against France in this round of 16. And obviously Germany versus Spain. Germany and Spain are the two best teams in this tournament so far. So to not see one of those two end up in a semifinal, or sorry, for both of them not to end up in a semifinal is pretty crazy to say. But yeah, it's an exciting one, and I think that Spain-Germany game is going to be electric, as well as the France uh, Portugal.
It's funny this tournament too. When I look back, I see like England with a pre-tournament favorite, and like
Mm.
it just like feels like obviously they're always seem like they get like very very hyped, and they never seem to deliver like very well in terms of these tournaments.
Bingo. I have no idea if this has to do with why bookmakers over here or the public over here perceives England to be the best, because when we see England, or the average person and consumer watches the Premier League on Peacock, which you could subscribe to for the Olympics, by the way, when you see people like watch that, they know it's like the biggest league in the world, right? So they just like assume league, national team, they assimilate, they line up, they have a good team on paper in certain areas and positions. They have great individuals, as I mentioned. They kind of just assume that they're going to be that good, that they're going to be the favorites for this. They made one final since our lifetimes, really. And they lost that one when they were up 1-0 at home. So good job on you guys. They usually have cupcake walks to the final. I know people like to laugh at the Boston Celtics for that. England has the easier paths almost every single time. They come up short the second that they run into like a highly talented and well-drilled team. And the fact that they're continuing to be favorites, partially due to their path to reach the final now, is far easier than those of the great teams that are kind of right there with them: Germany, Portugal, Spain, France, right? So naturally their odds are going to be higher because only one of them can make it out on that side to get there. That's ultimately what it is. And I think a lot of the markets in the US just seem to favor England, and so does the public. But I think slowly but surely people are going to realize that these guys are not who you think they are. And that starts with Gareth Southgate and his selections.
Yeah, certainly does. You'll see how these turns play out, Martino. Thanks all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Mike. You can follow me at Martino Puccio on all social media: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, kinda. But yeah, that's pretty much everywhere you can follow me, from anywhere from international soccer, club soccer, to baseball, basketball, sometimes the Jets when they really make me angry enough. But yeah, love coming on and talking as usual.